I've walked into hundreds of basements in my career places that felt soaked with memories the living tried to bury. Most of them were cold, heavy, unsettling, but they were still just basements. This one wasn't. This was the first basement that made me feel like something underneath the floorboards was awake, listening, learning, and waiting for someone to come close enough to speak. Years ago, I opened a case that I never wanted to revisit. A case that has followed me into dreams, followed me into quiet rooms, followed me even when cameras were off. A case where the voices didn't drift through rooms, they rose straight up through the concrete like breath. The woman who contacted me about this house was named Miranda Hale. Her voice on the phone told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't hysterical, she wasn't confused, she wasn't guessing. She was afraid in the way people get afraid when they know exactly what they heard. She told me the whispers started quietly, a sound she first thought was wind slipping under a doorway. Then she heard faint breathing that didn't match her own. Then footsteps on the floor behind her, single steps, slow and steady, always one pace behind. But the moment that pushed her over the edge happened while she was at work. She checked her home security footage out of paranoia, and she heard her own voice echoing up from the basement whispering, "Help me." She was miles away when that recording happened. When she played it for me, I felt something I rarely feel anymore, an immediate sense that something intelligent was down there, something that wasn't simply haunting her, but studying her. And the urgency in her voice wasn't fear of what was happening, it was fear of what was coming next. I decided to handle this one alone. No crew, no investigators, no cameras except for my own documentation. Some cases require silence. Some cases require you to walk into a room without other energy interfering. And this house felt like one of those cases. The moment I stepped inside, I felt a pressure beneath my feet, not on my chest, not on my shoulders, beneath me, as if something underneath the floor was pulling downward. Houses don't feel like that unless the foundation is wrong, or something beyond the physical world is anchoring itself beneath the structure. Miranda wouldn't step near the basement door. She pointed to it, told me she'd wait upstairs, and backed away from it like it had heat radiating from the wood. When I pulled the door open, a wave of air drifted up that didn't match the temperature of the house. It was colder, thicker, heavy with the smell of damp earth. A scent I recognized instantly, old stone, old soil, and old secrets. I walked down the steps slowly. With every step, the air temperature dropped. Halfway down, I heard the first whisper. Faint, broken, almost like someone trying to breathe out a word but not fully formed. When I stopped, it stopped. When I moved again, it followed. When my feet reached the basement floor, I saw immediately that the center of the room didn't match the rest. The concrete foundation stopped abruptly, and in its place was a circular patch of ancient stone, mismatched, uneven, roughly carved. These stones didn't belong to the modern structure, they belonged to something much older. This wasn't a design choice. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate placement, something the house had been built on top of, not around. I stepped closer. My EMF meter spiked so fast it startled me, not from wires, not from outlets, but from the stones themselves. When I hovered my hand over them, I felt a vibration rising upward, slow, rhythmic, like something shifting beneath the floor. Then a whisper drifted up through the cracks in the stones. It said my name, Zach. Not distorted, not distant, clear, human, aware. Then the voice continued, using a tone that almost sounded like pleading. Zach, come down here. Miranda was upstairs. This voice wasn't hers, but it was close enough that anyone else would have believed it. Something beneath that floor had learned her voice. Now it was trying to learn mine. As I stepped back, the voice copied the pace of my movements, matching me like a reflection. Then I heard a slower whisper rise through the stones. Don't leave me. Stay. This time the voice wasn't Miranda's. It was mine. Perfect, precise, identical breath patterns, identical pacing, identical tone. This wasn't mimicry. This was acquisition. Entities can imitate, yes, but not instantly, not flawlessly, and not with the exact emotional cadence. Something beneath that stone circle wasn't copying voices, it was absorbing them. I crouched closer to the stones, and the floor beneath me shifted, almost imperceptibly, like something below had moved its weight. I listened carefully. and beneath the vibration, I heard dragging, slow, deliberate, like fingers trailing across soil. I placed an audio recorder directly on the stone circle. I asked one question: who's beneath the floor? For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the vibration returned stronger this time. My recorder began shaking across the stone surface. A rumble rose up through the foundation, rattling the support beams. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The floor beneath my feet pressed upward slightly, as if something below was responding physically. The recorder captured what happened next. Multiple voices erupted at once, layered, overlapping, each one different. Adult voices, child voices, male, female, weak, crying, gasping, all saying one word: Zuck. Hearing your name spoken by something you can't see is unsettling. Hearing your name spoken in multiple voices that no longer belong to the living is something entirely different. As I listened to the playback later, I realized none of these voices were spirits communicating in real time. These were stored impressions, echoes of fear, remnants of people who once stood in this basement long before Miranda. Their voices weren't alive. They were imprinted. Something beneath that floor didn't consume people. It consumed their sound. I walked up the stairs without looking back. The air thickened behind me. The pressure followed my steps. Something beneath the stones had become aware of me, and I felt it watching, waiting, memorizing the rhythm of my breathing. Miranda asked me what happened. I didn't tell her it copied my voice. I didn't tell her the house learned people like memories. I only told her, "You can't go back down there." As I walked out of the house, I felt the weight of the ground again pulling downward, pulling inward, like a living throat swallowing silence. This wasn't a haunting inside the basement. This was something buried beneath it, sealed long ago by someone who understood the danger, someone who knew this entity needed a voice to grow stronger. That night, I realized the truth. It no longer needed Miranda's voice. It had mine. Leaving the Hale property that first night didn't give me relief. Most investigations lose their weight once I step outside, but this one stayed heavy on my shoulders the entire drive home. Something had learned my voice in a matter of minutes. That wasn't natural, not even in the realm of the paranormal. I couldn't shake the memory of that stone circle. Whoever placed it there wasn't trying to decorate a basement. They were containing something or warning someone. Before returning to Miranda's house, I needed history. I contacted the county archives, the Historical Society, and a retired land surveyor who knew the region better than anyone. The answers came fast, and none of them were comforting. Long before houses were built there, before the land was parceled, before even the first settlers arrived, that area had been described in old documents as the sinking ground. People avoided it. Animals avoided it. There were reports of vibrations under the soil dating back more than a century. Workers who tried to dig wells recorded voices in the ground. Not words, just tones. Humming, whispering, rhythmic patterns. And then there was the part the researcher almost didn't tell me. Years ago, the land was quietly purchased by a man who lived alone. He built a small wooden cabin exactly over the deepest part of the sinking ground. No one knew why. He lived there 6 months. One night, neighbors heard screams. By morning, the man was gone. The cabin door was open. The floor showed signs of struggle. And in the center of the room, someone had arranged a rough circle of stones directly over a hole in the ground. The cabin was torn down. The land was sold to developers. Decades later, a new foundation was poured on top of that same circular spot. Miranda's house was built directly over it. The stone circle in her basement wasn't built by the construction crew. It belonged to the man who vanished. It was a seal, and the new owners covered it with concrete, unknowingly burying it deeper. But it was still active, still holding something in place. And now the seal was cracking. I returned to the Hale house the following evening. Miranda told me she'd heard her voice again while she cooked dinner. This time it didn't whisper. It spoke a full sentence in her exact tone. "Come downstairs." She didn't go. She sat frozen at the table until I arrived. Her eyes were red. Her hands were shaking. Her voice was flat with exhaustion. "This house isn't mimicking me," she said. "It's replacing me." She told me she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard a whisper from the vents. Short words, incomplete sentences, like something practicing, I walked through the house with equipment running. The EMF meter flickered at random spots, but strongest near the hallway that led to the basement door. The air was heavier than before. The house felt like it had tension inside its walls, like static before a storm. I opened the basement door again. The temperature shift hit instantly, a cold blast rising upward through the doorway. I descended the stairs with Miranda watching from the top. The basement smelled even more of soil and cold earth, a sign that moisture was rising from below. When my foot touched the floor, I saw the stone circle again, but something was different. Dirt had pushed up between the cracks. The stones were shifting, not from the house settling, but from below. I crouched close. A low vibration pulsed through the floor. Steady, almost like a heartbeat. Then a whisper rose. Not a voice this time, just breath. Slow, dragging breath. I placed a thermal camera over the circle. The stones glowed cold, freezing compared to the rest of the basement. Cold means energy displacement. Energy displacement means activity. I took out my digital recorder and spoke. If something is beneath this floor, speak. Silence. Then a single tap from below. Then 2 more. Then 3 taps, spaced evenly. Intelligent response. I asked another question. Why are you copying her voice? The recorder picked up a faint murmur. Not a word. Not a sentence, just a rising tone like pressure building. But the real moment happened when I stood up. From behind me, near the stairs, a voice whispered my name. Zach. I turned. No one was there. Miranda was still upstairs, staring down in fear. Then the voice whispered again, closer this time. Zach. It was my voice again. Identical. Perfect. The entity didn't need more time. It had learned enough. I stepped back. The floor behind me clicked, like a stone being pushed upward from below. Then I heard something I'll never forget. Multiple voices speaking at once. Some sounded like Miranda. Some sounded like me. Some didn't sound like anyone human. All whispering the same phrase, "Let us out." The floor vibrated beneath my feet. Dust drifted from the ceiling beam above the circle. The stones shifted again, slightly higher this time. The seal was failing. I walked up the stairs immediately. The house felt narrower with every step, as if the walls were closing in around me. When I reached the main floor, Miranda grabbed my arm. What did it say? I told her the truth. It's not haunting you. It's trying to reach the surface. Her face went pale. She told me she had heard scratching below the basement a week earlier. She assumed it was pipes. But now she believed something had been moving through the soil directly under the house. And now it wasn't scratching. It was rising. I asked her if she'd noticed anything else. She nodded. The floor in my bedroom. It's warm. Warm flooring over a cold basement meant only one thing. Energy was spreading upward. I checked the bedroom immediately. The air felt wrong. The temperature was uneven. A cold draft from the hallway. A warm patch in the floor. Something was traveling through the house. Not physically, energetically. Voices carry energy. Fear amplifies it. And whatever lived beneath that basement was feeding on both. Standing in that bedroom, I understood something clearly. This entity didn't want to communicate. It wanted freedom. And the moment it fully learned Miranda's voice and mine, the seal under the house wouldn't hold. That night, as I left, the house seemed to shift subtly behind me. A sound came from the basement as I walked out the front door. A single knock against the stone floor. It wasn't a voice. It was acknowledgement. And it meant one thing. The entity knew we had returned. And it was preparing for the next step. I didn't sleep the night after I left Miranda's house. Not because of fear. Fear is familiar. This was something else. Something that sat in the back of my mind like a weight. A reminder that I had left a living person inside a house that was waking up beneath her feet. By morning, I made a choice. I wasn't going back alone. I brought a small team of trusted investigators, people who had worked cases with me long before cameras were ever involved. People who understood when I said an entity was learning, not mimicking. We arrived just after sunset. The house looked different now, almost swollen with energy. Light from the windows seemed dimmer than the surrounding night. The air felt off as soon as I stepped out of the vehicle, thicker, heavier, like the atmosphere was being pulled toward the foundation. Miranda greeted us at the door, exhausted, shaking. She said the voices hadn't stopped. They whispered through the vents, beneath the floorboards, through the walls. And each hour, the whispers grew clearer, stronger, more human. But the detail that worried me most was what she said next. "They're not copying my voice anymore," she whispered. "They're talking in new ones." That meant it wasn't mimicry. It was communication. We started with a walkthrough of the main floor. The house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a body, and the foundation was its heart beating irregularly under our feet. My equipment reacted immediately. Electromagnetic spikes came in waves, almost like pulses. The audio recorder picked up distant rumbles below the floor, too deep to be plumbing. Thermal scans showed cold trails moving along the walls like veins. Every sign pointed downward. The basement. We regrouped around the stairwell, and I stared down into the darkness. That staircase felt alive, like something was breathing beneath it. I went first. As I descended, the temperature dropped sharply. The basement no longer smelled like soil. It smelled metallic, like damp iron, like the inside of a cave that hadn't seen air for hundreds of years. The stone circle was the first thing I checked, and instantly I saw it. The stones had risen at least half an inch. There was space beneath them now, empty space. I crouched, and the air pouring out of that gap hit me like a blast from a freezer. Not normal cold, unnatural cold. Cold that drains energy instead of carrying it. I placed a sensor directly over the center. The reading jumped so high it overloaded. Then the floor vibrated. Not the house, not the foundation, the circle itself. A deep pulse moved outward like a shockwave. Dust lifted from the concrete. The walls groaned. One of my investigators stepped back quickly, shaken. "It's pushing up," he said. "No, it's coming through." I began an EVP session. "If something is under this floor, speak." A faint voice responded almost instantly. "Here." But the voice was wrong. It wasn't like before. It wasn't a copy of Miranda or me. It sounded layered, multiple voices overlapping, forming one broken word. I asked another question. "What are you?" This time the answer wasn't a word. It was laughter. Not joyful, not human. More like a breath catching in a throat that didn't belong to a person. My team froze. Then another voice whispered behind me, too close to be a reflection, too close to be an echo. "Don't open it." I turned fast. No one was there. But the basement wasn't empty. A shadow shifted in the far corner, slow, deliberate, like someone leaning just enough for us to see them. I raised my light toward it. The shadow shrank back instantly, as if the beam burned it. And then something spoke from the hole beneath the stones. "Stay." That single word carried weight, so much weight that the air seemed to compress around us. My investigator reached toward the circle, just inches from the stones. Before I could warn him, something knocked from below, hard enough to crack the cement edge. He jumped back. The stone in front of him lifted just a tiny bit, but enough for me to see what lay beneath. Darkness. Not soil, not wood, not stone. Just impossible, empty darkness. A hollow space where no hollow space should exist. It was deeper than any basement, deeper than any foundation. Something had carved a chamber beneath the house, or something older had always been there. I told everyone to step away. The moment we backed up, the basement lights flickered. Not from electrical issues, this flicker had rhythm, a pattern. The same pattern the knocks had. Knock and flicker, knock, flicker, knock, knock, flicker. A code, a call. Then the house shifted. A low groan moved through the beams overhead. Miranda screamed from the top of the stairs for us to come up immediately. We ran. When we reached the main floor, Miranda pointed to the hallway wall. A bulge had appeared beneath the wallpaper like something pushing from the inside. Something moving upward, traveling, spreading. We scanned it. Cold. Not normal cold. Basement cold. The cold from the circle was rising into the walls. I touched the wallpaper. It was vibrating. Something was leaving the basement. I backed away and told Miranda to gather only the essentials. We needed her out of that house right now. As she rushed to grab a bag, the vent beside her feet let out a whisper. Soft at first, then louder. "Miranda." She froze. I yelled at her not to respond, not to acknowledge it, but the whisper grew bolder. Miranda, we hear you. And then, in a perfect, flawless imitation of her own voice, the vent spoke again. Let me out. That was the breaking point. She dropped everything in her hands. Her knees nearly buckled. I pulled her away from the vent as the cold draft intensified, blowing upward like breath. My team positioned themselves between her and the hallway. The walls creaked, as if something was crawling through them, moving toward us, slowly, inch by inch. I had never felt a house behave like a living organism before, and what terrified me wasn't that something was inside it. It was that the house seemed to be helping it. The entity wasn't trapped anymore. It was exploring, learning, finding exits. As we reached the front door, a deep thud shook the floor behind us like something heavy collapsing onto the basement ceiling. Miranda grabbed my arm. Zach, what if it follows us out? I didn't answer her, because the truth was simple. If this thing wanted out, nothing in that house would stop it. We stepped outside into the night air. Miranda trembled uncontrollably. My team stayed close, watching the windows. Inside, the lights flickered in different rooms like footsteps moving across the house. Something was walking. The house exhaled, a long, low groan through the ventilation system. Then everything fell silent. Not peaceful silent, predatory silent. We stood there in the dark, the entire house watching us, waiting. For the first time in years, I felt something I rarely feel on investigations: urgency. Because whatever lived beneath that basement floor had awakened, and it wasn't staying down there anymore. The air outside the Hale house felt thinner, almost lighter, but not in a comforting way, more like whatever lived beneath that basement had pushed the atmosphere aside when we escaped. I kept Miranda beside me while my team scanned the exterior. Nothing moved, but every window looked darker than the night around it, as if the house was holding its breath. We relocated her to my vehicle, yet she didn't take her eyes off the property. She was afraid the entity would step through the front door at any moment. And truthfully, I didn't know if she was wrong. I radioed the team to give the house space. No one was to re-enter until we understood what the seal was holding. But distance didn't matter. The moment we stepped off the porch, every device we carried began picking up the same signal. A low, repeating hum, steady, rhythmic. Not interference, not static, the same pattern we heard beneath the stone circle. It was leaking through the ground, spreading outward from the foundation. I knew then that the house wasn't containing the entity anymore. It was venting it. While Miranda stayed safely in the car, I walked to the backyard with one investigator. The soil back there dipped slightly, a shallow depression maybe 3 feet across. The sinking ground, the same land described in the old records. I kicked at the dirt, and the surface vibrated beneath my boot. That wasn't normal soil. There was space under it, something hollow, the same hollow chamber that extended beneath the house. The entity wasn't limited to the basement. It had tunnels, pockets of air, pathways in the earth. It had territory, and we were standing on top of it. My investigator crouched with a thermal imager. A cold plume bled upward from the ground, faint but visible. The entity was everywhere beneath us, watching, listening, waiting. We returned to Miranda, and I made the decision that she couldn't spend another night here. She needed distance, somewhere safe. This house wasn't a haunting, it was a wound in the earth. I arranged temporary lodging for her in a nearby town. She packed only essentials, refusing to step inside the house again. Before we drove off, she asked a question I didn't know how to answer. What if it comes looking for me? I didn't want to scare her, but the truth was already clear. It doesn't want you, I said quietly. It wants out. Those words haunted me the entire drive to the hotel. Once she was safely inside, I returned to the house with 2 team members. Not to provoke, not to investigate, to observe. We kept our distance and watched the dark windows for movement. Around midnight, the house let out the longest, deepest groan I had ever heard. Like a pressure wave pushing through the foundation. Dust puffed from the roof tiles. A few shutters rattled. Then the basement window, small, square, near ground level, fogged over from the inside. The temperature dropped hard enough to crystallize moisture on the glass. A shadow moved behind it. Slow, shifting, growing. I raised my thermal to get a reading. The screen glowed pitch black. Absolute zero movement. Absolute zero heat. That wasn't a shadow. It was absence. The entity wasn't showing itself. It was removing itself from measurable reality. The fog on the window thinned. A shape pressed against the glass from inside. Not a face, just a ridge like knuckles dragging slowly across the pane. The glass creaked. Then a faint whisper escaped through the tiny cracks in the frame. A whisper using Miranda's voice. "I'm still here." My team backed up instinctively. I kept the thermal locked on the window. The shape faded backward into the basement. The whisper stopped. Silence returned. But not normal silence. A heavy silence, like the air lacked oxygen. I radioed the team. "No one goes inside, no matter what." We stayed another 20 minutes. The house remained still, watching us without moving. But I knew something had changed. The entity wasn't trying to communicate anymore. It was testing boundaries. When we finally left, I told the team to leave the equipment running remotely. Anything that shifted, anything that cracked, anything that moved, we'd know. The next morning, the house was quiet, but the data wasn't. Between 3:17 a.m. and 3:26 a.m., the sensors recorded something impossible. The stone circle, the one buried beneath the basement floor, moved upward by several centimeters over 9 minutes, then dropped, then rose again. Each time, a burst of cold air surged into the room, and each time, a whisper followed. Not from beneath the floor this time, from the ceiling above it. The entity had moved, vertically, upward, toward the main level, toward the vents, toward the walls, toward the living space. It was traveling. The next step was clear. We couldn't keep this house standing. I contacted the city inspector and filed an emergency structural danger report. They agreed to block off the home as unsafe due to foundation instability. That bought us time. Miranda accepted my recommendation to abandon the property permanently. She'd start over somewhere else. Somewhere without a living foundation beneath her bedroom. But the story didn't end there. 2 days later, demolition crews arrived. They tore through the top floors easily. The house collapsed in sections, piece by piece. But when they reached the basement, everything stopped. The excavator claw hit the concrete, and the concrete cracked like hollow plaster. A deep cavity opened beneath it, way deeper than any basement should be. The foreman called me immediately. When I arrived, I looked down into the exposed pit. The stone circle was gone. Not broken, not pulverized, gone. The dirt beneath the floor had pulled away into a cavern extending far into the earth, deeper than any natural formation in that region. And the air rising out of that pit? Cold. Still cold. The crew refused to go near it. They filled the pit with gravel and reinforced soil, layer by layer. Eventually, the ground looked normal again. But I knew the truth. A seal doesn't disappear. A seal gets moved. Something had risen before the demolition crews arrived. Something that now existed somewhere below that gravel, beneath the neighborhood, beneath the quiet roads surrounding it. It wasn't trapped anymore. It was free to move. Before I left the site for the last time, one of the workers approached me quietly. He said he heard something earlier that morning before anyone arrived, coming from inside the pit. A whisper, a woman's voice, and it said one thing: "Thank you." It wasn't Miranda's voice. It wasn't mine. It wasn't any voice we had ever heard before. It was new. A new voice added to the collection. A new mask for the thing beneath the earth. A reminder that the house was never the prison. The ground was. And when we tore down the house, we didn't stop the entity. We freed it. To this day, sometimes when I review the audio logs, I hear that same voice echo through the background, soft, distant, layered. Not a warning, not a plea, just acknowledgement. It remembers us, and it isn't finished.